can begin.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. In that case, let me quickly erase this. There we go. Well, pin video, fantastic. All right, can you hear me well on the other side of the world, I guess? No.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. In that case, let's get started. So hello, and thank you very much for coming to my talk on the evolution of public decentralized blockchains. I do apologize that I can't be with everyone else in Paris at EthCC. EthCC is probably one of my favorite conferences in Europe. I've been there for the last 3 years, but it seemed like a good idea to not travel currently. But I hope to be there in person next year as well. In any case, this is the second time I'm doing actually a virtual talk. So bear with me, I hope this works properly. If it does, this is a fantastic format in my opinion, and we should try this more often. In any case, so with this quick introduction, let's get to the meat of the thing. So as a quick introduction and background to myself, I'm Adrian, I'm the founder of Cryptium Labs and Metastate. As you can see, we already have a Twitter handle for Cryptium Labs. We don't yet for Metastate, so there's the website, you can find more about it there. As sort of quick background here, Cryptium Labs is a validator that runs proof-of-stake networks based in Switzerland. We're running out of the Swiss Alps. And the purpose is to run highly secure infrastructure on technically interesting networks. For example, we're currently live on Tezos, Cosmos, Iris, Kusama, and so I'm looking very much forward to the novel networks that contribute interesting ideas that are launching this year. Metastate, on the other hand, is a research and development company that is very much focused on bringing novel research from across disciplines together in order to solve hard problems in the blockchain space. To that end, we have one of the main areas which this talk is also about, and which I'll mention some more, which is core protocol engineering, so building protocol upgrades. We're currently doing this with Tezos. The second one is Juwix, a dependently typed language to build correct by construction smart contracts. And third area is cryptography, zero knowledge proofs. And yeah, you can find more information about all of this on the website, or you can also find me on Twitter and message me there. So with this brief introduction, let's get into the evolution of public decentralized blockchains. Wait, I'm going to change slides. There. So the evolution of blockchains. This talk is very much focused on looking what we have done so far, what we are doing currently, and what we can do in the future. Just to give you a little bit of context, Bitcoin was launched 11 years ago, right, in 2009, and hasn't changed much since. Same for Ethereum. Ethereum was launched in 2016, I think, if I remember correctly, 2016, I think, or 15, and hasn't changed much either. But realistically speaking, if we want the space to exist in the next 30 years and want these systems to exist in the next 30 years, we need to come up with an answer for how these systems evolve over time. So let's jump into the next thing. So why is constant evolution essential? Blockchains that that are launched right now are in most cases prototypes. They are sort of early research prototypes, and they're by no means production-ready end products. I know that a lot of teams will tell you otherwise, and a lot of salespeople and investors will tell you otherwise. But really, from an engineering perspective, they're just prototypes. They're early research prototypes. Most blockchains are developed by a core engineering group of, let's say, 10 to 15 people. They're not backed by sort of hundreds of senior software engineers building these products, stress testing them. So everything we currently have are early research prototypes. Maybe this is not completely true for something like Bitcoin, not because Bitcoin in itself sort of keeps up to date, but rather because the software is very stable at this point. A Bitcoin node that I launched 5 years ago, I expect that node to work in 15 years from now. right? So there's a lot of stability within the code base, which to some extent may be a good thing, may not be. We'll come back to this in a second. But certainly all protocols from 2016 and onwards are research prototypes, and they're far from being actually useful. So yeah, first thing, all current blockchains are early research prototypes right now, not production ready end products. By the way, this mostly applies to public blockchains, because if you deploy this in an enterprise setting, like if you have a permissioned blockchain, it doesn't actually matter how hacky your software is, because if something goes wrong, you can just hard fork, fix it unilaterally. This is much more of a problem in the public setting than in the permission setting. The other thing is we've seen, so why is it important? Well, in the last 11 years, we've seen a tremendous amount of innovation around what useful products could be out there that can be implemented using blockchains. And due to that, it's very unlikely the first prototype is going to be the ultimate product, right? So the thing that you launch is very unlikely to be the finalized version of what should be running in 20 years. To some extent, existing blockchains haven't taken this into account and are running into real problems due to this. But like the thing that you launch today is probably not the thing that you want to have in 20 years. So you need to have this concept of constant evolution in order to remain at the edge of the use cases that are out there and the use cases that blockchains can solve. And then lastly, on this product point, everyone is still trying to figure out true product market fit. We don't know what the real applications, I mean, we're starting to see them. We're starting to see that DeFi is picking up. We're starting to see that something in payments could work. But we're very far from the point where it's sort of 100% certain what the right product market fit is, right? Just to consider this, the entire industry probably today has less than 100,000 daily active users. Like any shitty iPhone application starts beating this. So blockchains as a whole, they are far from being mainstream, far from being used actively by a majority of the population. And due to this, as we discover new use cases, it's really important that blockchains, that existing systems can keep up with this evolution. Okay, so this is sort of the introduction for why constant evolution is really important. And I hope this gives you a little bit of context there. Next, I'd like to talk briefly about the current approaches that projects are taking. And you can sort of clearly delineate them sort of pre-2016, post-2016. So the current approaches are really Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, Litecoin, and others. So in that category, that distinction will become very clear in a little bit. So what do they do in terms of evolution? Well, Bitcoin's entire thing may very well be it's perfect the way it is, and it's not going to evolve a lot more. Earlier I mentioned that I expect the node that I started 5 years ago to still work in 15 years from now. That means there's going to be incredibly little evolution or progress in the core Bitcoin protocol. To some extent, this may be what Bitcoin is going for in terms of its positioning, right? In terms of the way the community is trying to position it. You could definitely take the argument that Bitcoin is sort of money and you don't want to change money all too much and all too quickly. But what I can already tell you that Bitcoin, the base layer, is not going to be a global payment system, right? Like no one is going to accept the UX trade-offs of having to wait at the very least 10 minutes for transaction confirmation. So if the design goal of Bitcoin is to be a globally used payment system, it's very unlikely that the base layer is going to achieve this without evolving significantly. There are totally possibilities with regards to interoperability where Bitcoin as an asset may exist in the next 100 years, but I think the settlement platform, like the state machine in which it will be transacted, if it's to be money, is not going to be the Bitcoin base layer. And of course, you can also talk about sort of second layer solutions, but I'll come back to this in like 2 slides as well. But let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of sort of this model in terms of evolution. There's really no evolution. One of the huge advantages, it's very stable, right? It is very safe, very easy to run Bitcoin nodes. They're very likely to change over time. There's a very low chance of bugs, right? Something that has been battle tested and hasn't been upgraded in 11 years. At this point, I'm actually fairly confident that this is mostly bug-free, even though also far from certain. But the downside to this is that it doesn't change it. It is not really changing at all, and it can't adapt to new use cases, right? If you want to have a system, like you want something that stays at the forefront, necessarily, depending on where you position yourself, where you want to be positioned as a project, you want to stay at the forefront. Bitcoin may not want to do this, but it means that it can't really take in new use cases as they come on, which is what we've seen with DeFi. Like DeFi doesn't work in Bitcoin, even though maybe you don't want this, so it'll be fine. The way Ethereum evolves is sort of fascinating to me. Ethereum started off very much looking like Bitcoin, right? Like it's not going to change it very much, especially Ethereum 1. Ethereum 1, the changes since launch have been minimal, even though there have been a couple of hard forks, but sort of the changes that Ethereum is making to the core protocol are minimal at best. And the transition from ETH1 to ETH2 is like going from the Stone Age straight to space travel. And this is sort of the complete opposite to Bitcoin's approach, which is we want to not change at all. To Ethereum's approach, we are going to go from Stone Age to space travel. We figured out how to use a hammer, and now we're sort of flying aircraft to Mars, effectively. From an engineering perspective, this is also somewhat doubtful to me, mostly because this is not how a majority of products get built, frankly speaking. It's like, and also that you can more look at it like there is like ETH1 is its own thing, and then ETH2 just happens to be built by roughly the same people, but it's really not the same chain. Like the distance between those two is large, right? Because right now you have a chain that can maybe handle 30 transactions a second, and in the ETH2 you just have 2024 shards. And so global scalability, everything works, everything is incredibly efficient. You have thousands of validators globally. And I mean, the best part, which I very much doubt, is that it's completely backwards compatible with ETH1. But we shall see what happens. Due to those current approaches, what has happened is that we have seen the development of layer 2. And I think layer 2 really comes not because it's necessarily a good idea, but because it's sort of due to historic path dependence. Because at the time when layer 2 came, there was really no other options, right? You didn't have systems that evolved gradually over time, and you knew that the existing systems for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero weren't going to change the base layer drastically. So in order to come up with a reasonable story for how the future should evolve, we as an industry came up with layer 2. So layer 2 effectively says, well, we don't have to change the base layer. The base layer is fine, and we just build all the nice fancy features that everyone needs on layer 2. There is going to be a massive trade-off because layer 2 generally hasn't seen adoption because it's incredibly hard to use. It's incredibly difficult to make securely, to build securely. So to build dApps that are secure on layer 2 is really difficult. And I think if we had started systems that can evolve over time, we would have never seen layer 2 actually. I think if we had started with something like Tezos that is designed to incrementally evolve over time, we would have never seen layer 2 pick up, because the correct place to spend your effort is not designing some really complex layer 2 system, but rather focusing on making the base layer better. And we'll come to this in the next part of this talk, which is novel approaches. So under these novel approaches, I really class the next wave of networks. So we're talking Tezos. Tezos is by far the earliest one that launched in this category. Cosmos, Kusama, which went live recently. Polkadot, which will go live eventually as well. Nia, Solana, there's sort of others there as well. And so yeah, just to define the category. And now in turn, we'll talk a little bit about the approaches that, like these novel approaches. So how does Tesla's evolution actually work? Well, Tesla's very much takes the model that you want to have constant incremental upgrades, right? You want to not go, well, today we're in the Stone Age and tomorrow we're traveling in starships to Mars. You rather want to go, well, next month we're shipping this, and 6 months later we're shipping that, and so on. You sort of ship an upgrade every 3 to 6 months, and in 5 years you'll have shipped 10 upgrades, and it will look very different from how it started, but it sort of happened gradually over time. And that allows you to take applications with you, to take the community with you, to explain to people how sort of this helps, and to also incorporate effectively data you get from the market in terms of what use cases are you actually building for, right? Because in the build once, launch, never change system, you are effectively assuming that you know all the use cases that will be required, instead of saying, well, let's see what use cases are actually valid and which use cases appear, and let's start improving on those use cases. So Tezos to me is really synchronous automatic on-chain upgrades. Kusama and Polkadot do roughly the same thing. Although I have to mention that Tezos was like 1.5 years early in terms of engineering, which is really impressive. So the way it works from an engineering perspective, oh, and sort of as a brief side note, with Metastate, we've been building so the last 3 upgrades for Tezos in conjunction with Nomadic Labs. So due to that, I know a lot how Tezos' system evolves. So we're one of the core development teams of Tezos. So what actually happens in practice, you have a restricted subset of the OCaml compiler, and the protocol itself is written on OCaml. And so then anyone in the world can inject a protocol. So as an idea, inject a protocol, see if the community likes it, and then you have a coin holder vote. So you have some governance function that decides, do we want this, do we not want this? And if they decide that they want it, then they get to vote on it. And when the protocol sees that a supermajority wants to have this new protocol, then the nodes will automatically download the source code of that protocol, compile it, and link it in at runtime. So, and Kusama does the same thing, and Polkadot do the same thing with WebAssembly, but it's effectively the same idea. It's at some point, at some block height X, instead of running protocol A, we now start running protocol B, and there's some migration between it. But it's a continuous chain where everyone that follows this main chain will also automatically get the upgrade. There's no user interaction required. One of the downsides to this approach, though, is that it is fairly risky, right? Because like, what happens if there's a bug in the future protocol that you want to migrate to? What happens if protocol B is buggy? Tezos' system right now is valued at $2 billion. So sort of at block 10, all of a sudden you go, well, let's see if protocol B works. Let's migrate $2 billion to protocol B and hope for the best. Due to that, I do expect that these systems will start to solidify significantly over time because people will become more risk adverse as the valuation of these things goes up. But a huge plus side to this is that everyone is automatically upgraded, right? Instead of having these minority folks, so maybe 5% of the community want to do something else, they still can, but by default, they just follow the governance mechanism. So there's no way for people to reject this automatically. Cosmos takes a very different approach. It takes synchronous and manual hard forks. So imagine, again, this carries most of the risk of the Tezos approach, but also has another downside, which it's difficult to pull off. Because what happens here is that there's, again, some governance function which determines what new protocol to run. And once they've determined what new protocol to run, then all validators and node operators have to effectively, at some block height X, which is also decided by the governance process, stop their nodes, export the state into a new Genesis file, and start the next evolution of Cosmos, the Cosmos Hub, with that Genesis file, which is effectively a state export from the previous chain. So in Tezos, the way upgrades look is you start on 001, you then at block 10 you go to 002, at block 100 you go to 003, and so on. But in Cosmos, what happens is you start at block 0, at block 10 you do an upgrade, and then you dump the state and start a new chain at block 0. This makes it incredibly difficult to sync the history from Genesis. And to some extent also allows validators to have much larger influence over the governance process, because they can easily go and say, well, we're not upgrading our nodes. Whereas in the Tesla's case, even if they wanted to, as long as the token holders want to upgrade to a specific protocol, anyone can just re-inject the same protocol, and you can have another vote. And there's very little the validators or bakers and Tesla's can do to prevent this. Yes. Okay. I'd also like to quickly talk about future approaches. So we've seen what happens sort of in the old systems: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, so on, Litecoin maybe, Ethereum Classic. Then we've talked about what happens in the newer models, Tezos, Cosmos, and I think those are really the two main things we will see. We'll see synchronous on-chain automatic on-chain upgrades and synchronous manual upgrades. And now the future approaches. How do we de-risk? How do we mitigate the risks that are apparent in the previous two upgrade paths? Well, we can do something that leverages IBC. And I know that maybe not all of you know IBC, so I'll briefly explain it. IBC stands for Inter-Blockchain Communication. It's a protocol very much in the sense of TCP/IP that just defines how it's going to get run by the same validators as, let's say, I launched Tezos 2. So we're currently working on an upgrade for Tezos called 007. And in this future model, what could happen is you launch the 007 upgrade as Tezos 2. It doesn't duplicate the asset, it doesn't duplicate XTZ, but it allows people, and it's secure. Tezos 2 is run by the same validator set as Tezos 1. And then users, instead of having to do a governance vote, they can asynchronously start moving coins over to Tezos 2 to test it out, to see how it works. And if they like it, they can stay. And then assuming that enough people move from Tezos 1 to Tezos 2, you can have sort of a forced migration at the end. Let's say 80% of the coins have moved from 1 to 2. At that point, you can just force migrate everyone else, the remaining 20%. So you still maintain the property that you aren't forking into crazy many systems, you still maintain coherence, but you de-risk a lot of these upgrades, because instead of having to hope that everything works, you get a low-stakes way in which to test out upgrades. And the second real benefit to this is you can have many upgrades existing at the same time. So one of the problems in the current governance approaches is that you have, let's say, 20 competing proposals, and like many versions of them. Some just slight modifications of each other. But as a community, you have to converge on a single one. And this is sort of in a governance function where it's, yes, people can vote, but there may be other incentives there. But with upgrades of IBC, what you could actually imagine is you have 20 proposals and you see where the market moves. Yes, so this is sort of very briefly some thoughts and ideas and sort of what's happening in the industry right now in the evolution of blockchains. So we spoke about different upgrade strategies. One was effectively Bitcoin, we have no evolution. Then Ethereum, we jump from the Stone Age to space travel. Tezos, Cosmos, Polkadot, Nia, we have incremental synchronous evolution. And then possibly in the future, we can have upgrades over IBC, so incremental asynchronous evolution. That's it, actually. I'm running out of time, actually, I notice now. So thank you very much. I'm Adrian. Of course, for Metastate, if you'd like to find out more, go to the website. We have a bunch of open job postings. We're working distributed system, programming languages, cryptography. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you very much for listening. Oh, and I guess we can take questions over the air. Is that true?
We can take some questions. Yeah. If you have some question, no. Apparently, nobody have a question.
No questions. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you very much, and have a nice day. Bye bye.